Welcome to the Honest Mamas podcast, where we talk about the emotional and spiritual aspects of the motherhood journey. We are a team of honest mamas. Myself, Melissa, Sophie, and Claire. We are psychotherapists, moms, and friends. Join us as we get real about the topics that matter to you. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for episode number 36 of the Honest Mamas podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have Mara Hirschfeld join me today on the conversation about how to fortify your relationship when a baby is present or just being thought of or navigated through, or let's just be honest, anytime. I think it's always important to fortify your relationship. So today's conversation, we're going to really dive into how to reconnect with your partner, how to navigate some of those really challenging moments of arguments and resentments and all those hard things that we get into a couple. So please join me for today's conversation with Mara Hirschfeld. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. Hi, Mara. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Melissa. So wonderful. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Just so our listeners know, we have spent the last about 20 minutes trying to be able to make the internet work. So we've been cracking up over that, but I think this is going to work. I think we're going to be okay. Mara's like in the basement of some library in a sound padded room or something. So hopefully this will work. Yes, fingers crossed. So let's jump right on in, because I think you're such an awesome person to talk to about this, because you're so, whenever I have couples to refer to, I always think of you. You're like one of my go-to people.
Aw, thank you.
Plus you're down the hall, so that makes it a little bit easier too.
True.
And so I know you've been studying so much EFT. If you can maybe just tell our listeners what that stands for and how you kind of explain that. And obviously it's like probably, we could spend all day explaining what EFT is, but maybe for the lay person that's never heard that before, if you could kind of give a sort of smaller version of what that is, that would be great. We'll start there.
Okay, sure. Absolutely. So I have been studying EFT for quite a while. I love it so much because of the impact and the power it has with couples. But EFT stands for Emotionally Focused Couples Therapy. And so the model was developed by Dr. Sue Johnson off the premise that we develop attachment bonds, so, close, intimate relationships with our romantic partners in much of the same way we did with our parents when we were younger. So it talks about how we rely on our partners to be there for us when we need. So in the actual work of the therapy, the therapist kind of works with the couple to first just identify the interaction cycle and explore how the couple triggers one another. So for example, let's say one partner says, well, when you criticize me, I respond by snapping back and defending myself. And then the therapist kind of works to understand, well, what happens when you snap back and defend yourself? And the more, obviously, the more you talk through with the couple, usually it's the more that person snaps and defends themselves, the more escalated the other one becomes. And so it really looks at helping couples lean into their emotional vulnerability by sharing what happens for them underneath the anger. First, we identify the cycle, and then we explore further. When I yell back at you, I do that because in the moment, the message I have is that I don't think I'm good enough. So it really delves into deeper emotion.
I think so many couples that walk through my door, which I know probably also walk through your door, is that they've been dealing with so much stuff that has been built up over time. And, because we're on Honest Mamas podcast, what I'm thinking about are the issues that sort of develop over time, and then you throw a baby into the mix, or a child into the mix, or a pregnancy into the mix, or a pregnancy loss into the mix. And, I think what will be really helpful for us today is to really hone in on how we help these couples, through EFT, because that is your lens. It's also something I so believe in and have found to be very effective in a lot of work with couples. And so it sounds to me from your angle and from what EFT is, it's emotionally focused couples therapy and really kind of slowing it down, noticing what happens when somebody kind of responds or reacts out of anger, and really becoming aware of how people feel in the moment to track it so that they don't kind of react as we all do at times. Our backs are against the wall and we're like, well, you go there, you're doing that thing that you always do and blah, blah, blah. And that's when people land in our office.
Exactly. Yeah, very, very true.
So how does it actually help couples connect? Like if we go a little bit deeper, maybe you could even give an example, obviously not one real. We don't want to break any confidentiality here, but what you might see in a session and how you might help a couple reconnect after disconnection.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Melissa. I definitely agree with you in terms of the fact that we're so quick to react. And so one thing, just to reiterate what you were saying, I love about EFT is the therapist's job is really more to be like a process consultant to kind of reflect back what they see in terms of how both partners are triggering one another. And the biggest part of the reason EFT works so well in the room to help the couples actually connect is by slowing it down, highlighting the good intentions underneath, because oftentimes, we assume malintent. And when couples have been together, I see this a lot. When they've been together, 3, 5, 8 years, there's that pattern, that cycle that they've been in for so long, it catches them so quickly. And they're so used to assuming malintent in each other. And oftentimes, at least from a lot of the work that I've done, couples have the best of intentions. It's just the way they communicate and the way it ends up getting delivered that their partner mishears it. So it's slowing them down. It's highlighting the good intentions. I think the most important part of EFT that, if I can stress anything, is the ability to ask the couple to reach for one another in a moment of vulnerability. So EFT doesn't just deepen the emotion in the room, but then it asks you in a moment when you would normally probably hide away or withdraw from your partner to actually turn to your partner and say, I'm hurting because. And so to give you an example, I was actually an old couple I used to work with he was struggling very much to turn and share his feelings to his partner. His mother was really critical in the past. And also with her, anytime he would share things, she would kind of criticize or in her best attempt, try to say what she meant, but it would come across to him as him not being good enough. And so in the room, I would slow it down and very many times, work with him to have him turn and say, I don't come towards you because I'm afraid, or I don't reach out because I feel like I'm not good enough. And oftentimes some of those emotions come from the relationship, but other times those negative narratives that we have about ourselves come from way back when. So it really externalizes the problem and helps the couple see that, the message that their partner is hearing is so not what they mean to send. And it softens it a lot. It helps people recognize how much love is really underneath.
That is all awesome. That's really great. So when you talk about having couples kind of share from this more vulnerable place, what hits me as you're sharing it, and obviously in my own couple, working with couples, there is so much courage that you have to have, after years or months, or a time period where you have tried to be vulnerable with your partner and you have turned to them. And as you say, kind of, what did you say before? Like reached for them?
Yeah, reach for them.
Yeah, in vulnerability. And, what do they do if the fear's there? I mean, I just imagine a lot of couples come in and they say, I'm not going to be vulnerable with him or her. They bit my head off last time, or they dropped me. They didn't understand. I was really coming from this good intentioned, vulnerable place. And, I sort of got the message, oh, get over it, or, oh, you're too emotional, or whatever it is. How do you help couples really start to see almost with like fresh eyes?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Melissa. And actually happens quite often because you're right. We've been in these cycles and these patterns. I mean, even just neurobiologically, our brain has been accustomed to respond to our partner in the same way for so many years. So I think the coolest part about EFT is the repetition. So we do it over and over and over. And at the beginning, oftentimes, I would definitely not guide a couple to turn and reach towards one another until they're de-escalated, which just means until, the anger can kind of be worked out enough in the room over a number of sessions. So that way they feel safe enough to take that risk to turn towards one another. But when they do, you're exactly right. Oftentimes their partner says, well, I don't believe you. Here you are telling me that that you love me or that you want to make me feel like I'm good enough. Well, that's not how you've made me feel for years and years. So, I think you're just saying this. I've heard before, I think you're just saying this in front of the therapist. And so it really, really takes just slowing it down and normalizing for the couple. And this happens, I think, for all of us, that we're not going to believe it right at the beginning, right? We're not going to believe it maybe 2, 3, 4 times after we hear it. But the more and more the therapist can facilitate those safe conversations in the room, sure enough, with a lot of the research that has been done on EFT, over time, your brain starts to trust that it's the cycle that's the enemy. It's this pattern we've gotten into with our partners that's the enemy, not each other. And that really helps.
Who calls it? I don't even know who calls. I should know at this time. And if it's Sue Johnson, who is the creator of EFT, I'm going to be embarrassed. But the negative dance. Have you heard that before?
Yeah, no, you got it. It is Sue Johnson.
Okay, good.
That is definitely it. She talks a lot about like the metaphor of like a tango, right? And so like how it takes two people to tango in the same way it takes two people to fight. And so often I see couples come into the room and say, well, I do this because he does that. Or I react that way because if she would just do blank, then it would be so much better. And it really is this dual process, right? I mean, it's so hard to admit and take accountability for our own part in that. But I think Sue Johnson does a beautiful job of recognizing and externalizing that the cycle is the problem, not each other.
Yes. And so I'm curious, we talk, obviously we're both therapists. We advocate therapy when it is needed, hopefully before it becomes necessary. And I'm curious for the listeners out there, maybe the moms that are out there listening that, maybe can't get to a therapist or have just had a baby or, sort of maybe don't have the financial means to see somebody. Mm-hmm. What are some of the pieces that they could kind of bring, kind of into their relationship without the guidance of a therapist if they're not able to get there at this point? Any tips or tools that you would kind of give in a concrete way to help a couple who's just not communicating well, how to communicate a little better?
Yeah, absolutely. So if therapy is obviously kind of not an option, like you're saying, Melissa, then I think one of the best things to do is to start by looking at ourselves. And I know that seems so self-explanatory, but it's so hard when we are mad at our partner for making us feel hurt and for making us feel vulnerable to not necessarily reframe in our minds like what we might be doing, right? That's triggering them. And so one thing that I think couples can definitely do on their own is write out, you can make a list even of the things that your partner does that triggers you. But then I would also suggest, you making a list of what you think you do that triggers them. Because it's really important to look at it as, like we've been talking about, this kind of two-person dance. Other than that, I think one of my biggest recommendations for couples, especially after, like you said, big life changes like having a baby or after getting married, is to really take time to connect to one another and find times where they can, go out on a date or enjoy time alone, even if that's like 10 minutes before getting ready for bed, just so that way they can really reconnect. I think a lot of times parents, because kids take over so much and they're so wonderful, it's such a wonderful part of life, but the couple unit can oftentimes go forgotten. And I think that's a big piece of the puzzle for a lot of couples, is being able to recognize that actually when the parents are strong, when they're interconnected and that relationship is safe, the family system operates in such a better way.
It's so good you brought that up, because so many times I think in our culture, and especially as a new mom, you think, wow, okay, we got to tend to the baby. The baby's crying. I got to hurry. And is the baby okay? And there is so much focus turned on the baby and then the children that, obviously early days, you've got to be focused on the baby. The relationship definitely does have to take a little bit of a backseat, even though you will try to kind of employ some of the things that you're recommending. But yes. I do think to have a strong, solid foundation for a family setup, it really has to be the two parents coming together. And then mm-hmm. I remember I had this image my therapist of many, many years said to me, it's almost like the couple is like a bird or an owl or some wise, hawk, something like that. And they're mm-hmm. solid and they're grounded. And then the children kind of fold in underneath the wings. They're sort of there. They're part of the unit. They're, connected, but they're not the priority 1,000% of the time.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's such a great metaphor. Yeah, it's really true. And I think it's a hard thing to do because obviously as parents, we want to give and share so much, right, with our children, and we just want to be the best we can be for them, that it's hard to sometimes remember that our partners need us too.
Right.
Right. And that underneath those strong, competent adults are, younger versions of ourselves that really needs comforting and needs safety. One other thing I was going to mention, Melissa, and I think this is an important tip when you were asking for like some specific tips for couples. A big piece of the puzzle, especially I'm thinking for people who are listening and saying, well, all this vulnerability sounds really great. And, it's wonderful to turn to your partner. But oftentimes when we're at the beginning stages of therapy or when we're reaching out for help, we're not in a place where we can do that, right? We're angry, we're flooded. We're oftentimes maybe even resentful at how long these feelings have been built up over time. And so the other tip that I would want to just share with listeners is the idea of a timeout. And what that would look like is, one partner in the middle of a heated argument or a fight, especially if the kids are around, being able to take a timeout and say, I need 20 minutes to go on a walk, to get out of here, to take a break. And the goal of the timeout is really for the partners to come back to one another after the 20 minutes and check in with each other. And it's okay if one or both of them are still really angry and can't share from a safe and vulnerable place, then they would take another 20 minutes. And I've had couples, honestly, that have done this for hours until they're really not escalated anymore. And even when we're in a place where we're too flooded to be vulnerable, being able to reach towards our partner and say, I'm sorry I can't be there for you the way you need right now, but I need to go outside and take a walk, and I'll be back to continue this later. It's such a different message that it sends to your partner, right? We send a message of, I'm here for you, I just can't be here for you right this moment, versus what we often do in fights, which is yell, scream, and walk out, shut the door, and we make our other partner feel abandoned and hurt. And that's just where, we're in this downward spiral of escalation where we're only re-injuring one another. So I think recognizing when we're flooded and being able to take a step back is so big.
Yeah. And I think it goes, both ways that, as a partner, as you're kind of, you should know each other so well, or you're learning to know each other so well that maybe perhaps you notice your partner is extremely flooded. And perhaps you suggest, hey, this is what I'm noticing. I'm going to take a break, even though you could still hang in there and stay. You know what I mean?
Yeah, actually, yep. That's a really good point. Being able to see each other's tolerances.
Yes. And the other thing I was thinking of too is that, I've had some couples where, let's just say the man says, well, I took a time out. And I said, but did you tell her that you were taking a time out? And he said, no, I just left. And I said, no. That brings up so much abandonment fear, especially if you've been wounded in that part of your life before from a younger age or an older age. I think just really trying to set a framework, I'm going to be 10 minutes. It's going to be a day. I'm going to go to my mother's house, like whatever it is, but giving some framework of like, let's come back. I'll call you in an hour and we'll decide if we're ready to come back or whatever.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And I think when we're angry, it's so hard to honestly take the risk, because there is a certain amount of vulnerability in saying, look, I need a timeout versus just walking out when we're angry, right? But I think the message it sends to your partner is our relationship really matters, and the work we're doing or, the improvements we want to make, that matters more than my anger in this moment, but I just can't be here for you right now. I'll be back later.
Yeah. And that definitely, I'm just thinking again of the mom with kids, and, it's so as a mom with two little ones, it's so hard to argue, and with my partner and with my husband when there are little kids around. I sometimes just want to get in there and have a good argument and like flush it through and move it through. But the kids really kind of put this interrupted stance to it. And so, if you're listening and you're in a partnership, I think it's so important, even if you're a single mom and, you have to deal with your child's father, coming in and out of your life, possibly, just to keep in mind, the skill and the art of what it takes to not get into that sort of reptilian brain of fight or flight. When we argue, that's sort of where we go. We want to like fight back tooth or nail. We want to run and get the heck out of there. But even in relationships that aren't with a partner, if it is sort of, a situation where you've got a father and you're not married or all of that, for the sake of the child, I'm also thinking about, just being able to learn how to communicate better and learn how to de-escalate yourself is so helpful, and our children learn from that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Melissa. I agree with you. It's like it's modeled in us, right?
Totally.
We're not perfect. We're still human, but to the best we can.
Totally. And so I love the trigger list you gave, writing down the triggers that you feel when your partner does X, Y, or Z, and then taking some accountability. What do I feel when, what is my part to play in all of this? Oh, maybe I say X, Y, or Z, or I leave this thing open or whatever. And he's asked me a million times to close it. And, can I take some accountability and some responsibility?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about this in terms of some extra resources. There's a wonderful book called Hold Me Tight. And it is a book I give to a lot of couples while we're working through the process. But I was thinking back to your question earlier around, what can couples, like maybe if therapy is not an option, can they do on their own? And it's a really great book. It's by Dr. Sue Johnson. So it talks about, EFT and the process, but there's these play and practice exercises at the end of every chapter where you can really do some self-help stuff on your own, even if you don't have a therapist to walk you through it. So that's a really great option as a resource too. I just don't want to forget to tell you.
No, that's wonderful. And do you suggest couples read it together, or is it okay for one person to read it?
I would suggest reading it together if both partners can. You don't have to necessarily sit and read it together, but reading it at the same time it really helps to highlight, how we trigger one another. If one partner just reads it, the other one's kind of not as educated on how they might impact one another.
Right. Okay, great. Anything else that you would add in terms of communication, learning to communicate better with each other? I'll tell you one thing that I'm thinking, and then you can brainstorm as I'm sharing this, is around gratitude. And I find that that's so helpful. I don't know if that's particularly EFT or what, but I think I just want to say that I know from my own marriage that really helps when we're in a difficult spot. And as much as I sometimes don't want to say, thank you so much for doing the dishes or taking care of the baby or, whatever it is, and I'm, angry or a little bit resentful, it really, to me, it's such a practice in coming back and saying thank you. Thank you for this. Thank you for that. Thank you for, showing up today or going to work so that, we have an income or whatever it is. I think it's such a small, simple thing. And I oftentimes give my couples homework, before bed around 3 things, of 3 pieces of gratitude to share with each other. And sometimes you'll give those lovingly and sometimes you'll give those begrudgingly. But, you're with this person for a reason. And that, is what we're kind of tapping back into, I think, in the gratitude exercise of like, why am I with this person? Oh, right. They do have this part of their personality that I really love. I love that they make me laugh or, whatever.
Yeah, that's really impactful. You're absolutely right. And it's so easy nowadays too, with just getting so busy and, we're running a mile a minute and it's so easy to forget. Right? To thank one another.
It is. And I've taken into my practice with my husband is I'll just send him a text out of the blue saying, I love you, or send him a text like, thank you so much for last night when you cleared up all the laundry. And that just really made me, it meant a lot. So even something small like that can make such a great impact.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I think I would add is, I know this is easier said than done, but something I talk a lot with my couples about is recognizing that the parts of our that we're not perfect, right? As human beings, and we all have parts of ourselves that can come out and in those moments are not necessarily our best version of ourselves. And so what I oftentimes share with my couples is, how can you look at your partner and recognize that the anger, the shame, the criticism, whatever it is that's coming from them, well, this obviously doesn't give permission to the behavior. How and what is that doing? Like, what is that serving in the moment, right? And a lot of times our most defensive parts are really our protective parts. And oftentimes, there's strategies that developed way earlier in life, probably before we ever even met our partner. Let's say we had, a critical father, or abusive parent, or something like that. We learn very quickly how to protect and defend ourselves. It's kind of honestly crazy to me. This is one thing I love so much about therapy is how it happens almost naturally. The body just finds a way to protect itself. And so I have a lot of couples where sometimes the wife will come in or the husband will come in and say, well, they never share, I just want them to be open with me. And the more and more we explore together, the more we recognize that withdrawing or shutting down, it's actually a protective mechanism, because maybe way back when they would share, someone would tell them that they're too much, or, I don't have time for you. And so I think recognizing that what you might be receiving as a defensive part, in your partner may also have once been a survival strategy.
Absolutely. And I think that is such a beautiful way to soften around, arguments or challenges in relationship, when you really can see the person, as a whole being versus this person in this moment that's just annoying the crap out of me or saying the wrong thing or whatever it is, seeing them as a whole individual, as a child growing up with the experiences that they had. And, of course it makes sense that they go into this place when we're arguing because it triggers this part of them. I think that can be such useful information for us to hold, our partners in a very different light in those challenging moments. And maybe you don't remember it, but maybe the practice is to, as you said, not to be perfect, but to come back and try to find that ground again with each other, which I think a lot of times repair has a lot to do with that too. Can you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of couples do repair differently. Some brush it under the rug and then it comes up many years later, right? I think others, resolve it in the moment. I think the biggest part of repair is owning, and like I know we've had this theme kind of throughout our conversation, but owning and taking accountability for our own part of the process and how we might have triggered someone. And also in recognizing that while we might not have meant to send the message that we did, somehow, some way, our partner picked that up. And so I think a big part of the repair process is being able to obviously apologize, acknowledge how someone else is feeling, and really just sit with them in the pain until they feel heard and understood. Oftentimes, partners have a beautiful way of just naturally forgiving one another if they feel like their partner gets them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just lastly want to say, I think it's so hard too, because I know, and I'm thinking again of like the new mom that's sort of in this rut of a dynamic. And maybe, because I see primarily women and I do see couples as well, but primarily women will have feelings that sort of keep emerging. And it's almost as if just having some patience, that it takes time to sometimes work through these pieces of like, what I hear often is, but we talked about that. I thought you were over that. Like, oh my God, we're talking about this again. I can't believe this, And of course, the other partner has a right to have their frustration also. And maybe there is something being triggered for them too. But if you can just gently kind of remind each other that this sometimes takes time because these are very old patterns and old feelings that potentially could emerge.
Yeah, definitely. And old wounds, right? So you're right. It's going to take so many, maybe not as many years as it took to form them, but it will take time to work through and process that together. And I think meeting one another with compassion is another just good thing to keep in mind.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Mara. I feel like we could spend a whole nother segment talking about couples. It comes up so much in, this time and journey in a woman's life, having a baby brought into the world and into their family system. So if people do want to reach out, I know you're in New York City. If people want to get more information about you, where should they go?
Yeah, absolutely. People are welcome to visit my website at Holding Hope MFT, so HOLDING HOPE MFT, marriagefamilytherapy.com. And there you can read a little bit about, again, the EFT that we talked about today and just some helpful tips. And I also have an Instagram and blog account that people are welcome to follow if they're interested. And that's also Holding Hope MFT.
Wonderful, Mara. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. I learned so much from Mara, and she is just such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to couples. What I loved about in today's conversation was really remembering the good intention that your partner may have, even in saying something harsh to hear or hard to hear, that perhaps inside they really do have the best of intentions in communication. I also loved how Mara gave us practical tips on how to work through if you can't afford to go to a therapist or it doesn't work out with scheduling or for whatever reason. There are some really great tips in this podcast that will really help you feel a little bit more aligned in your couple. So to get our show notes and sign up for our e-course or get more information, you can go to www.honestmamas.com/episode 36. Also, join our community on Facebook by going to www.facebook.com/honestmamascommunity, where these conversations and a whole lot more will continue.